B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, News and Comment. It's Wednesday, September 20th, 2017. As Mexico reels from another killer earthquake, the Caribbean is hammered by Hurricane Maria, and islands including Dominica, Guadeloupe, St. Croix, and Puerto Rico are under assault from a massive storm. As you know, I'm not in a position to cover these natural disasters, but I do have great concern for the people who are affected, and I hope that none of your friends or relatives are in the eye of the storm or the path of the earthquake near Mexico City. My lead story today is one that concerns me greatly, because there is a movement afoot to lead progressives, mostly people who supported Hillary Clinton for president last year, into a mentality that puts us on a war footing with Russia. It's all centered around the Russiagate scandal, the largely unproven, evidence-free claims that have become a telenovela. That's what I call Rachel Maddow's nightly program. And my concern is that Yasha Levine, the intrepid reporter who is about to publish the book Surveillance Valley, he linked me to a video that I hadn't seen. This was late yesterday, and it comes from a newly formed committee to investigate Russia. And Rob Reiner, the Hollywood actor and producer, he was meathead on All in the Family. And in full disclosure, I've met Rob Reiner, I've talked with him, and he did a lot of good. He led the charge to pass a ballot measure that placed a tax on cigarettes here in California. That money was earmarked for early childhood development. And I spent 10 years with a nonprofit helping use those funds to help with the parents of young children here in California. It was a great effort. But when it comes to Democratic Party politics, Rob Reiner is a hardline establishment guy. He was loyal to Hillary throughout the primaries last year, wrote off Bernie Sanders, because it was Hillary's turn, in his view, I guess. And now Rob Reiner has made a serious blunder. He has become a part of this committee to investigate Russia, and his teammates include some of the darkest neocons who led us into the war in Iraq based on lies. That includes Max Boot, the darling thinker of the neocons who was a member of the Project for a New American Century and helped lead the cabal that got us mired into this situation in Iraq, and we've still not escaped from it. Another member of this committee is David Frum, the guy who marketed Bush's war, the adventure in Iraq. He's the guy who wrote the speech about the axis of evil that Bush used to scare Americans and to create the roadmap for regime change that the neocons envisioned. And the other member of the committee is James Clapper, the most recent director of national intelligence under the Obama administration, a proven perjurer. We know that he lied under oath to the Senate about the widespread domestic surveillance of Americans' telephones and their phone records. It was the triggering event that led Ed Snowden, to become a whistleblower and a major leaker. And James Clapper has zero credibility. James Clapper, I believe, and I can't prove this because we don't know who the anonymous leakers are who drive the latest developments in the Russiagate saga every day. But based on what I've seen, I think that Clapper is front and center with many of the disclosures that have stoked the narrative that, again, has no public evidence and very few public officials who've been willing to tie their names to the leaks that they have performed. So this committee has either enlisted as a volunteer or hired the Hollywood actor Morgan Freeman as their spokesperson. I guess they wanted the voice of God, but James Earl Jones has passed. CNN still uses his recordings. But I want you to listen to this remarkable piece of propaganda. And Morgan Freeman uses Hollywood tactics. He first asks you to imagine a Hollywood movie or a script for a movie that includes a nasty Russian spy who rises to power. And then after he gets you, kind of drawn into his fantasy, to this fictional idea, he then says, oh, it's all real. And this feeds into the desire of many Hillary supporters to believe that Russia manipulated the election and that we're very close to gathering the pivotal evidence that's going to lead to Trump's resignation or impeachment. And I don't think either is around the corner. I'd love to see Trump out of office. But this is a really dangerous way to attempt that because it counsels war with Russia. Listen, here's Morgan Freeman.
We have been attacked. We are at war. Imagine this movie script. A former KGB spy, angry at the collapse of his motherland, plots a course for revenge. Taking advantage of the chaos, he works his way up through the ranks of a post-Soviet Russia and becomes president. He establishes an authoritarian regime, then he sets his sights on his sworn enemy, the United States. And like the true KGB spy he is, he secretly uses cyber warfare to attack democracies around the world. Using social media to spread propaganda and false information, he convinces people in democratic societies to distrust their media, their political processes, even their neighbors.
Now, what you just would have seen on the screen if you're watching the video, and I've linked to the video so you can watch it yourself at your convenience, but on the screen were shots of the recent New York Times stories about the use of Facebook to influence voters here in the United States. And as you know, I believe it happened, but I believe that it had minimal impact. And all of this is put aside as we heard the opening declaration from Morgan Freeman. We are at war. We have been attacked. Now, we are not at war. That is a reckless lie. And it feeds in to the attitudes of many people who I believe will be persuaded by this into embracing the idea of a hot war, a military conflict with Russia. Morgan Freeman continues.
And he wins. Vladimir Putin is that spy, and this is no movie script. We need our president to speak directly to us and tell us the truth. We need him to sit behind the desk in the Oval Office and say, my fellow Americans, during this past election, we came under attack by the Russian government. I've called on Congress and our intelligence community to use every resource available to conduct a thorough investigation to determine exactly how this happened. The free world is counting on us for leadership. For 241 years, our democracy has been a shining example to the world of what we can all aspire to. And we owe it to the brave people who have fought and died to protect this great nation and save democracy. And we owe it to our future generations to continue the fight.
Join the committee to investigate Russia. Join the fight.
That was Rob Reiner's voice. Join the fight. These are warmongering ideas delivered by an actor that many people admire and trust, a guy who has played these kinds of roles in feature films. And this is where Hollywood meets propaganda, meets the unproven claims of the Trump-Russia narrative. This is extremely dangerous, and I believe that it leads so-called progressives who don't want a war with North Korea, who didn't support Bush's invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan, but who believe that it's now somehow justified because Russia presents this clear and present danger. And of course, the Morgan Freeman video doesn't include any mention of all the cyber attacks that we make on Russia and other countries. It's just part of ordinary business. And so I put this up on Facebook. I shared Yasha Levine's post, and I wrote, wow, Rob Reiner joins Max Boot, James Clapper, and David Axis of Evil from, and they recruit Morgan Freeman to stoke hysteria about Russia, Joe McCarthy. Oh, about Russia. New sentence, Joe McCarthy would be proud. Then a few people who are listeners, like Billy Cook, Alex Marin, Elizabeth Ferrari, they offer posts that agree with me. Carl Howard writes, Peter, I sure would like to hear your opinion on Digby Parton's unwavering conclusion on this morning's edition of the Majority Report that without question, Gusever 2.0 was either a Russian asset or a Russian operative doing Putin's insidious bidding to hijack the DNC's email server simply in order to clumsily leave Russian imprints all over it and then never to really do anything particularly malfeasant with all that potentially lucrative hijacked data. Well, I haven't reviewed Digby's piece, but I'll take your word for it, and thank you, Carl. Robbie Martin says, extremely disturbing on many levels. And then I start to hear from people who I've known for many years, who I know to be moderate Democrats, Bill Clinton Democrats, who were staunch supporters of Hillary Clinton for president last year. Chris Clark is the son of a British spy who used to host talk shows on KGO radio here in San Francisco, and we are social friends. He writes, really, Peter B., stoking Russia hysteria? Joe McCarthy would be proud? Question mark, question mark, question mark. Really? Double question mark. And I did respond later to Chris. Then Christine Kraft, who also was part of the talk host lineup at the legendary KGO. It's no longer legendary here in San Francisco. She says, we were attacked and we are at war with Russia. So this shows that people who I consider to be intelligent, who are critical thinkers on many issues, are nonetheless willing to just swallow this propaganda piece and regurgitate it. I mean, Christine Kraft is a brilliant woman. She's one of the people who broke the glass ceiling as a television news anchor. And to see her just parrot this bullshit that came out of Morgan Freeman's script, wow, that's really disappointing. Then Nicole Bell, I've danced with her on Facebook many times before. She is a very closed-minded Hillary Clinton supporter. She wrote, are you actually minimizing Russia's interference in our elections? What is wrong with you? This is a new battlefront. Why are you so reticent to see it? Is it because you'll have to give up your Clinton derangement and stop blaming her for losing the election? Now, you know my views. I believe Hillary Clinton actually won the election. It was stolen from her by voter suppression tactics and various other illegitimate means that were plied by Americans. We've got the trail of evidence to pretty well establish that. Anyway, Bell goes on, Jesus Christ, this is a nonpartisan issue. This isn't red baiting. You ahistoric boneheads can't even grasp the nuance that this isn't about communism. Well, the McCarthy reference does not require communism to be germane. I'm talking about the hysteria that is being generated about Russia. And that was an essential component of the whole McCarthyism scare in the 1950s. And let's see, she has another comment. Oh, shame on you. I thought you had better critical thinking skills than that. Then my friend Dave Cook, a longtime radio news anchor, very smart guy. He says, Peter, I guess I shouldn't have complimented his intelligence because he complimented mine as a way to dismiss my comment. Peter, you're one of the smartest people I've had the privilege of knowing, but with all due respect, you are so wrong about this McCarthyism accusation. Your distrust of the intelligence community, I suspect, may be leading you to a faulty conclusion. Let the investigation play out. Now, I've never said I oppose the investigation, and all I'm talking about is that the speculation that is treated as fact is what I reject at this stage of the exposure of this story. Then he says, we'll see where it goes. In the meantime, I hope you'll agree that this issue is so insignificant in comparison to much weightier issues like possible war with North Korea. Well, Dave, a war with Russia While it's hard to, measure the negative impact of these kinds of calamities, I say that a war with Russia, a much more potent power, with a much bigger nuclear arsenal and the ability to deliver it, is a much greater concern. And to see elements of the American political body, Hillary Clinton supporters in particular, being persuaded to embrace war with Russia, this is lunacy. This is madness. So then Joe Clarici, a great listener and supporter of this podcast, he wrote, "There are plenty of grounds and means for removing Trump from office that have nothing to do with Russia or their alleged election meddling. Emoluments clause, obstruction of justice, gross incompetence. What's lacking is the political will in his own party." Well, Joe's correct about that. So I won't read too much more, but here was my kind of general reply to the whole group. I said, the point of this post is that Rob Reiner has joined with dangerous people with a history of promoting war based on deception, and Morgan Freeman's message is reckless and hawkish, attempts to recruit all types of non-Trumpers to embrace a war with Russia. From some of your comments, it appears to be working. McCarthyism wasn't limited to purging communists. It was based on Russophobia, which is being exploited in Freeman's video. Yes, Trump and company have lots of dirty ties to Russia, and they're running a cover-up that deserves full investigation. Media speculation based on leaks and unseen evidence, in quotes, has built a narrative that too many treat as fact and then accept the suggested leap to war. You don't have to agree with me about Russiagate, but do think about the obvious warmongering. And I hope that you will likewise view the Morgan Freeman video, and if you use social media, express your outrage and objections to this propaganda. Yesterday's speech by Trump at the United Nations was a hot steaming mess of threats and bullying, blustering about how great he is and how great the United States is and how perfect we are. And Iran's President Rouhani responded today saying that Iran would respond decisively and resolutely if the U.S. walks away from the nuclear deal agreed to with other countries in 2015. And it's important to note that today Trump was dropping big hints. He loves to play these games. Remember his secret plan to end the war in Syria? Well, he told journalists repeatedly today that he has made a decision on whether to withdraw certification of the nuclear deal with Iran at the next deadline of October 15th. Now, he wouldn't drop this hint if his decision is to stay with the agreement. But he repeated 3 times, "I have decided." But when asked what he's decided, he said, "I will let you know." So he's being coy, he's playing this game, and it's a very high-risk game because the other nations, Britain and France in particular, are willing to negotiate an addendum to the Iranian agreement. Iran has rejected that, but Russia and China don't support any renegotiation of the deal. So this leaves the United States with really only one option, which is to walk away. And Rouhani said that Trump's speech, in which he threatened to totally destroy North Korea, is ignorant, absurd, and hateful rhetoric, unfit to be heard at the United Nations. It would be a great pity if this agreement were to be destroyed by rogue newcomers to the world of politics. Now, Trump used the word rogue to describe North Korea and Iran, so I think Rouhani chose that with that in mind. And he ended by saying that, he actually has more here. The world will have lost a great opportunity. Iran will not be the first country to violate the agreement, but it will respond decisively and resolutely to its violation by any party. We never threaten anyone, but we do not tolerate mean threats from anyone. If the U.S. breaks its commitments under the nuclear agreement, then no other country will be willing to enter into negotiations with the United States. He also added something that we have known but has never been publicly admitted by the United States. Iran will never seek a nuclear weapon. Now, why does Iran have nuclear enrichment programs? It's for the same reason that Kim Jong-un has developed nuclear weapons in North Korea. It's the same reason that the lessons of Saddam Hussein, who gave up his weapons program, The lesson of Muammar Gaddafi of Libya, who gave up his weapons program. They're both dead. And that leads people to believe that you have to at least pretend to be developing a nuclear weapon to keep the United States and other predators at bay. And this leads right into a very strong and analytical piece by the New York Times Washington bureau chief, David Sanger. I've linked to the article in today's show file for the podcast. And what he notes is that Trump's eagerness to withdraw from the Iranian deal, which is mostly doing the bidding of Benjamin Netanyahu and the Zionist extremists in Israel, weakens his hand in any potential negotiation with North Korea's Kim Jong-un. And Wendy Sherman, who negotiated the deal with John Kerry for Obama, said if the president pulls back on the Iran deal, given Iranian compliance with the deal, it will make diplomacy on North Korea almost impossible because U.S. credibility will be shot. And Trump acts as if, when he makes a threat to North Korea, that's all Kim Jong-un hears. And that Kim didn't listen to the rest of the speech where he threatened to pull out of this laboriously negotiated deal with Iran. And so we keep coming up with excuses about why the Iranian deal isn't good enough and it's not acceptable, but all of this is channeling Netanyahu. Rexon Tillerson, Secretary of State, told Fox News yesterday, if we're going to stick with the Iran deal, there has to be changes made. The sunset provisions simply are not a sensible way forward. Now, that's because after 15 years, many of the limits on production of nuclear material will be expiring. And they call that kicking the can down the road. Well, it's kicking the can all the way to the other end of the highway. And 15 years is a long time. It's much better than the alternative, at least the alternative fear, which was that Iran was actively developing a nuclear weapon. And as Gareth Porter exposed in his book about Iran, that simply was not the case. It was a very carefully crafted smokescreen, and the U.S. bought it hook, line, and sinker. So this just shows the volatility, the lack of rational, careful thought about U.S. foreign policy, the reactivity of Trump. And it's as risky as that Morgan Freeman video. And in fact, I want to mention that softening up the left, the Hillary Clinton supporters who were nominally against the war in Iraq because it was a Republican war, softening them up for a war with Russia also opens up the public mind to other military actions, including some sort of a preemptive strike on North Korea. This is a dangerous, slippery slope. I want to commend to you Robert Perry's analysis of the Trump speech. It's at Consortium News today, and I've linked to it. He says that this must rank as one of the most embarrassing moments in America's relations with the global community. Trump offered a crude patchwork of propaganda and bluster, partly delivered as a campaign speech praising his own leadership, boasting about the relatively strong U.S. economy that he mostly inherited from Obama, and partly reflecting his continued subservience to Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu. Trump's speech may have extinguished any flickering hope that his presidency might achieve some valuable course corrections in how the U.S. deals with the world, specifically in terms of military action promoting regime change. And after analyzing the speech, Bob Perry concludes that Trump is falling in line as an interventionist just like Bush and like Barack Obama. Quote, Trump has already shown disdain for international law by authorizing military strikes in Yemen and Syria. If not for the fear of provoking American anger, many of the world's diplomats might have responded with a barrage of catcalls to Trump for his blatant hypocrisy. Without doubt, the United States is the preeminent violator of sovereignty and international law in the world today, yet Trump wagged his fingers at others, including Russia over Ukraine and China over the Spratly Islands. It's a strong piece. I encourage you to read it. He concluded, what Trump made clear in his UN address is that his America First and pro-sovereignty rhetoric is simply cover for a set of policies that are indistinguishable from those pushed by the neocons of the Bush administration or the liberal interventionists of the Obama administration. The rationalizations may change, but the endless wars and regime change machinations continue. We're learning that the Trump team has tapped into campaign contributions and the profits that came from selling those silly red hats to pay the army of lawyers who have been retained to represent Trump, his son-in-law, key administration officials in this ongoing special counsel investigation. In August, the Republican National Committee coughed up $230,000 to pay for Trump legal fees. And I saw a legal analyst on television last night who aptly described this as probably lawful, but awful. Now we turn to the grotesque efforts to deny health insurance to many low and middle income Americans, the Republican effort to, one more time, try to repeal the Affordable Care Act. And when you look at the breakdown of the Lindsey Graham Bill Cassidy package, it's as ugly as the stuff that came before, and in some ways it's worse, because ultimately it would set up each state with a different health insurance and coverage program. Each state could set its own terms, and this could create a patchwork of very confusing health coverage and health care access, particularly for those Americans who don't have a big income. The bill is structured as a sort of slow-motion repeal of the main coverage programs of Obamacare, and it would mean that most likely 23 million fewer Americans would have coverage. But the Congressional Budget Office has said they don't have time to analyze this before the Republicans plan to rush it to a vote. It hasn't been heard in committee. They just want to put it on the floor and see if they can get 51 votes. And I won't get into the weeds of Senate rules, but basically, if they act before the end of September, they can pass it with just 51 votes. That would be all Republicans in the Senate. And if it happens after that, they would need the 60 votes to end debate before they could go to a vote on the underlying bill. So that is one of the reasons they're rushing. We have 11 governors, including 5 Republicans, and Lisa Murkowski, the senator from Alaska, who really are pushing hard to kill this bill. But the lies of declaring it, as a way to provide cheaper health insurance for people, that is such a false claim, and a cynical one at that. Because what they're going to do is just make the coverage so weak that the premiums will be cheap, but it won't be anything comparable to what we see in the exchanges provided by the Affordable Care Act and the expansion of Medicaid under Obamacare. And this is all set to grease the way for a huge package of tax cuts. And we're seeing the outlines now. They haven't dropped the details of the bill. But Senate Republicans, and I've pointed this out a week ago, when I asked, what is the case for tax cuts? Well, they were opposed to anything that Barack Obama proposed unless there were offsetting cuts to prevent any further increase in the long-term national debt. But Republicans, now that they're in power, just like Dick Cheney in 2002 when he fired Bush's first Treasury Secretary, who had opposed a second round of tax cuts for the rich, and Cheney just told the guy, look, it's our turn, we can do what we want, and who cares if it stokes the deficit? So the long-term debt has just passed $20 trillion. And when it was 17, we were told it was cataclysmic and, it could end life as we know it. But with Republicans driving the bus, they use fuzzy math. They use these rosy projections that are based on absolute bullshit, claiming that the tax cuts will increase economic growth and that you move growth from 2 to 3% and the tax cuts pay for themselves. We all know that it doesn't work that way. It has never worked that way in the past. This is just the latest sorry iteration of trickle-down economics. Well, Bernie Sanders, this didn't really get covered a week ago, But when he introduced his Medicare for All proposal last week, he also dropped some ideas about how to pay for it. Some of it would come from employers who would be relieved of buying health insurance on the commercial market for employees. Some might come from those of us who are covered by it. But Bernie is also proposing a wealth tax. And as outlined, he is offering a tax on net worth that would only apply to people who have assets over $21 million. And I don't know where that threshold number came from. But, for example, if you're worth $21.5 million, you would pay a 1% tax on $500,000. In the white paper proposal, Sanders estimates that a tax on net worth would raise about $1.3 trillion in 10 years and have the added benefit of rebalancing the wealth inequities in the United States. I certainly think it's worth consideration. It is, of course, dead on arrival in a Republican-controlled Congress. A good op-ed at today's Guardian by Trevor Timm, pointing out that while many people have said we simply can't afford Medicare for all, they don't run the numbers, they simply declare that it would be too expensive. And Timm contrasts that with the way members of Congress, with only 5 Democrats in the Senate accepting themselves, voted to fund the Pentagon at the $700 billion level, including shoveling billions of dollars into the Pentagon that the Trump administration and the Secretary of Defense didn't even ask for. It is really grotesque. And let's name the Democrats who voted against it. Gillibrand of New York, Wyden of Oregon, Leahy of Vermont, Merkley of Oregon, and Sanders, who is a caucus Democrat, but of course considers himself an independent. That means that both of my senators in California, the hawkish Dianne Feinstein and the largely undefined freshman Kamala Harris, both voted for the $700 billion package. Thanks for joining me for my daily news and comment podcast. It's available free, and it's available on YouTube. I'm Peter B.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling.